Hello, my name is Michaela Gower, and this is my case study over Get This Child Out of My Room. I will start with a summary of the case study. In this case study, we're focused on a third grader in Mrs. Taylor's class. That third grader's name is Carl, and he's identified as behavior disordered. There's already a behavior management plan in place for Carl, but Mrs. Taylor, his homeroom teacher, claims that he's beginning to show aggressive behavior towards her, and she's worried that it's going to escalate towards the students. Susan Green is the special education teacher who works with both Mrs. Taylor and Carl, and she's new to her position, but she works to create an intervention plan with the district SPED coordinator in which Carl would be removed from his home general education classroom during the outburst that he's having. So I'll begin with category 1 and we'll dive into more of the details. Category 1 is problem identification and analysis. I'll start with what I know. I know that Carl was self-abusive and placed on a consequence and reward program. After his parents' divorce approximately 3 months ago, his behavior has changed from that self-abuse to aggression towards his teacher. Mrs. Taylor would like to have Carl removed from the classroom. She makes a demand to the special education teacher, Mrs. Green, that she just can't handle having Carl in there anymore and wants him immediately removed. She presses Mrs. Green to contact Carl's parents to get things going. Mrs. Green is new to the district. She's a special education teacher, and since this is her first year, she lacks experience handling this sort of a challenge. What do I need to know? I need to know what Carl's current behavior management plan looks like. I want to know a little bit more about Carl's past experiences within the school. Has he had issues in the previous years? What have his teachers in the kindergarten, first and second grade had to say about Carl? Does he receive any counseling services? It mentions that his older siblings at the junior high do. What strategies has Mrs. Taylor already utilized in her classroom to address his needs? And has she documented any of that behavior that she's seen? So the key issue here is that each team member that's going to be a part of Carl's IEP needs to be on board and needs to make Carl a priority. We have a general education teacher who really isn't willing to work with the special education teacher, and then also, the special education teacher does schedule a meeting with the parents, but it needs to be communication amongst all. So your special ed teacher, your general ed teacher, your administrator, and the parents. And really here in this case, we're not having that collaboration. So that is our main problem here. Everyone's kind of on their own page when it comes to Carl, and we need to get everyone together on one page and work together. So this is my proposed plan of action in category 2. How would I handle solving this problem? First and foremost, I'm going to create an intervention system. This is going to be formed with teachers, administrators, parents. So this could be teachers that have Carl throughout the day. So we get to hear a little bit about Carl in different aspects. We need to form some detailed information and steps that are going to happen when Carl does have those outbursts. And it needs to be a meeting with the parents present as well. We need to form some strategies, and once we form those strategies in that detailed system for what's going to happen when Carl does have those outbursts, we need to make Carl aware of this system. We'll make him aware, and then we'll see if there are improvements being made. Mrs. Green will continue to make observations in the classroom. There needs to be communication from all ends. So we know kind of what's happening at Carl's home life, and then maybe how that's affecting him at school, kind of getting down to the root of the problem here. Communication will be big, and then we need to assess that implementation. What's working, what's not. If something needs to be changed, then obviously we're going to have to meet back up with that IEP team to make those changes. The strategies for implementing those plans, the biggest one here is going to be the communication amongst team members to keep everyone on board with what the focus of this plan is, which is for Carl and his learning. I think that's been kind of the priority that everyone has might be a little bit different. So now we've got to use that plan to communicate and make sure that we have Carl at the center. Taking time to document strategies utilized in the classroom and at home will be a big one. Looking at what strategies work for Carl and what doesn't work. We need to observe Carl in different settings, like I mentioned. PE could be different from his time in social studies and whatnot. So observing Carl in different settings. We also need to make sure we're documenting those outbursts. What's causing it? What's triggering it? And what can we do to minimize that? And then again, assessing that implementation, continuing to collect data throughout the whole process, and then meeting back with the team to decide, are we making those improvements? Category 3, resolve the issues based on promoting the success of all students. So the way I'm promoting the success of all students is asking myself, what is the best for the students? And that's educating Carl in his least restrictive environment, which means we need to give him the best possible education. We need to keep him around his peers and in the classroom as much as we can. We know that this is a new behavior. It's not something that Carl has exhibited continuously. He did have one sort of self-abuse behavior, but the lash outs towards his teacher is a new behavior. So is that linked to the stress at home from his parents' divorce? Those are questions we're going to have to ask ourselves. What's happening to cause those outbursts? There needs to be a process with data to back it up. As Mrs. Taylor came to talk to Mrs. Green, she was very adamant that Carl just needed to be removed from her classroom. Well, we know as leaders that that is not appropriate in this situation because there are steps you have to take. There's processes that we must go through, and data must be backing up each step of the way. It can't just be a jump from the general ed classroom to a special education setting all day long. So she was kind of out of line in her comments there because there hasn't been that process and there hasn't been data to back up her claim that we know of. And the team overall just needs to have Carl as a top priority. It was evident from when Mrs. Green, Mrs. Taylor, an administrator, and Carl's parents all met together that there was kind of a lack of focus on Carl. Maybe at home just because of what's going on with the parents and their divorce. So we just need to make sure as teachers and leaders that we're focusing on Carl and meeting his needs to the best of our ability. And this would be done for any student in the class or in the school. So that's how this is promoting the success of all students. We're going to educate each student in their least restrictive environment. We're going to make sure that decisions we make regarding their education are backed up with data, and we're making each student a priority. That is our job as educators. Continuing with category 3, the resolution here is that there is not data to suggest that Carl should not be in the regular education classroom. He is on track with the developmental or with the 3rd grade curriculum. He's meeting that. So there's no data to suggest that Carl should not be in the regular education classroom. A meeting must be held to decide how to change Carl's plan based on his learning needs and data collected. So we had that original IEP meeting that Mrs. Green scheduled after the claims that Mrs. Taylor was making. But we've got to collect data from that point on to see if there's changes that need to be made based on his learning needs. But as for right now, there is no data to back up that he should be moved from his 3rd grade classroom. Students and their learning are a #1 priority, so that is one reason that resolution's made. It is evident that Carl has many issues to deal with at home that could be contributing to what he's doing there at school. The behavior he's exhibiting is new. So like I said before, the claim that Mrs. Taylor makes that he immediately needs to be out of his room or out of her room is just out of line because this is a new behavior. We've got to delve in and figure out what's going on and really focus on Carl and what we can do to make um, his learning experiences positive. Also, it mentions that his mother feels overwhelmed with taking on a lot of the responsibilities in the home and also having a job. So we know that there's other things going on. So we must look into all of that and really, like I said, put Carl as our top priority and really focus on his needs. Our next category is debriefing the problem, looking at my thoughts, feelings, and values. What I was thinking as I read through this case is that teamwork was lacking in this situation. As an administrator, it would be my role at the beginning of the year to make sure, even if it's new teachers, veteran teachers, to make sure all teachers understand that we are all there for the children. It's not my children and your children, they are our children. So Mrs. Taylor really needs to come in with more of a team mentality to approach Mrs. Green. It was almost as if she was forcing Mrs. Green to make some sort of a decision that she knew was not right to make. Now, Mrs. Green did the correct thing in contacting her administrator because she had the knowledge of how that process works. But it's just important to make sure all team members know that these are all our children and we're going to work together as a team to make sure each child is getting what he or she needs. All teachers and support staff, like I said, must work together to meet the needs of all students. Mrs. Green needs support to be able to continue to make tough decisions. Like I said, she did the right thing in contacting the district SPED coordinator. It would be nice if she could have other avenues of support as well. But with the lack of funding that the district has, because they're spread pretty thin, I don't know what that looks like exactly in her district. But she did the right thing in going to her administrator there. What other things can be done to meet Carl's needs? Can we set him up with a mentor in the building, whether that be a teacher or an older student, maybe giving him some time to read to a younger student. Who knows? We haven't explored those avenues yet. We've got to get to know what's going on with Carl, and then we can find some things to meet his needs. Maybe he just needs some time to debrief and refocus throughout the day. It's obvious there's things going on at home, so what can we do to give him that time? He just needs an outlet to let out those emotions. And we'll find more out as we continue doing that research. Unresolved issues. I don't know about the strategies that Mrs. Taylor had utilized prior to coming to Mrs. Green. Did she have any success or failures implementing those? The past experiences, like I touched on, that Carl has had at home and school. We know that this divorce occurred roughly 3 months ago. But what else has been going on at home and school that could be contributing to this? Other avenues we could explore based on what the district offers. Now, it sounds like they could be spread pretty thin with just having one superintendent and then one administrator considered the assistant superintendent. But, school psychologists, counselors, do we have those on site? Could they help out Carl? Is something to think about. And then also just the support for Mrs. Green, like I talked about as a first-year teacher. I commend her for being able to understand to go to her administrator and ask for help, and the actions that she took, because she was really standing up for Carl and she was following the right path and really being there for Carl. But what other support could be available to her? How did I, as the school leader, promote effective and efficient management? Well, Mrs. Green showed knowledge of the IEP. After she sought advice, she began to form a plan and contact parents. The meeting was held and the parents were informed. How do I promote the social learning? Well, Carl is the top priority and we must work together to make sure his needs are being met. The purpose of the plan was to reduce outbursts. So if we educate him in that least restrictive environment, we're allowing him to socialize with his peers. And lastly, how do I promote student academic learning? Well, giving that time in class to be around that curriculum and looking at the whole child, both at home and at school. Thank you for watching.